Brighton, August 1953, Thursday evening, 8:30. A schoolteacher from Peckham, 38, in his fourth year of this particular week, was standing at the entrance to the Palace Pier Theatre with his wife, waiting for the second house to begin. The seats they had booked were in the third row from the front. He had booked them on Wednesday morning from the Pier box office because in the summers he came to Brighton. He liked to book the Pier Theatre early in the week, before the good seats went. They had arrived on the train from Victoria on Saturday morning. Not the Brighton Belle, that was for the business traveller, and the actor and the person who liked to say they had come on the Belle, but on the ordinary Southern Railway service that ran non-stop from Victoria to Brighton in 57 minutes. 1,000 other people had arrived on the same train that morning. Another 1,000 had arrived on the train before it. Brighton on a summer Saturday received them all, absorbed them into the Pebble beach and the promenade and the two piers, and produced the specific social world that the schoolteacher had been coming back to for 4 summers. He had not come back because Brighton was restful. Brighton was the opposite of restful. It was loud, crowded, full of the energy of a seaside city that had always been too large and too knowing to behave like a conventional resort. What it offered, and what he came back for, was something more interesting than rest, the feeling of being in the right place for the kind of evening he was about to have. The right place was the Palace Pier Theatre. The right evening was a Thursday in August. The second house, third row from the front, in a theatre at the end of a pier that extended 1,722 feet into the English Channel. A theatre built over the sea, reached by a 20-minute walk above the water, available to anyone who had walked from the shore and paid the admission at the pier gate. What that specific location gave the schoolteacher and his wife on a Thursday evening in 1953 is what this video is about. Before you can understand what the Palace Pier Theatre gave a schoolteacher from Peckham on a Thursday evening in August 1953, you need to understand what Brighton had built itself to be, and specifically what it had refused to be. Brighton was not Torquay. It was not Eastbourne. It was a city that happened to be on the sea, and the sea had not made it modest. The Grand Hotel, opened in 1864 with 201 rooms all taken on the first night, had the first hydraulic lift in Britain outside London. The Hotel Metropole, opened on 26 July 1890 with over 700 rooms and seating 500 diners simultaneously, was at its opening the largest hotel outside London. A special luxury train had carried 1,500 visitors from Victoria for the Metropole's opening night, depositing them on a King's Road covered with a red carpet of hassock sand. Brighton had always operated at this scale. The Southern Railway completed electrification of the Brighton Main Line on 1 January 1933. From that point, the journey from Victoria to Brighton ran non-stop in 57 minutes. Not the hourly interval service of most lines. A train every hour, reliably, 57 minutes, with a premium all-Pullman service. The Brighton Belle, running 3 return trips daily for those who wanted to arrive having eaten breakfast in a proper dining car. Brighton had become the most accessible major seaside resort in Britain. What you came to Brighton to do was specific to Brighton. It was not the refined promenade morning of Torquay. It was not the formality of Eastbourne. Brighton served the working Londoner who needed a day's air and the week-staying family who wanted a proper holiday, both at the same time, on the same beach, on the same pier, and neither group had to pretend that the other wasn't there. That democratic character, the particular quality of a resort that belonged to everyone on the same train, is what made Brighton specifically Brighton. And it is what made the Pier Theatre on a Thursday evening something that Torquay's dining room could not replicate. Before we continue, if this kind of documentation is what you've been looking for, consider subscribing. Every video on this channel goes into one specific element of the British seaside holiday between 1920 and 1980. What the resort was, what the promenade or pier or hotel offered, and what the people who saved for a week there were actually doing when they arrived. Not nostalgia for deck chairs. The documented social meaning of a ritual that a generation of British families arranged their working year around. What a Thursday evening on the Palace Pier gave a family from London or the Midlands was not entertainment in the ordinary sense. It was the specific pleasure of being on a stage, suspended over the sea, among 1,000 others who had also come 50 miles to be there, and the knowledge that this was exactly what they had come for. And if you took these holidays, or your family did, put it in the comments. Did you come to Brighton by the Southern Railway from London, or did your family spend a whole week here? Did you walk the Palace Pier in the evening, and what did the lights above the water look like from the pier head? Next time, Bournemouth's Pavilion Ballroom and the Winter Gardens, and what an evening on the sprung floor gave a couple from the Midlands that Brighton's pier could never have offered. Back on the promenade. The Palace Pier at Brighton opened on 20 May 1899, designed by R. St. Georgemore at a cost of £27,000, including 3,000 lights to illuminate its opening night. It was 1,722 feet long, extending just over a quarter of a mile over the English Channel. By 1901, the 1,500-seat theatre at the seaward end had opened. By the 1950s, the summer season at the Palace Pier Theatre featured performers including Tommy Trinder, Doris and Elsie Waters, and Dick Emery, whose post-war audiences were among the largest in British popular entertainment. The pier provided something that the promenade and the hotel could not. The promenade was a stage for the performance of leisure. The hotel dining room was a stage for a more contained social performance. The pier was something different. It began with a physical act available to no other venue. You walked out over the sea. Through the gaps in the planking, the sea was visible below, moving, audible as a sound specific to a pier that is different from the sound of the seafront. 20 minutes of walking above the sea brought you to a theatre that existed nowhere else on the British coast in quite the same terms. The Pier Theatre was not more civilized than the promenade or more prestigious than the hotel. It was more specific, a place that offered one particular experience that the other venues in a Brighton holiday week could not replicate. The combination of the journey to it, the walk above the water, the sea below the decking, the lights at night, and the entertainment at the end gave the pier evening its quality. It was not something you could do in London. The schoolteacher from Peckham had not come to the Palace Pier Theatre to see something he could not see elsewhere. Tommy Trinder was performing in London theatres. What Brighton in August could give him that the London theatre could not was specific and simple. It put Tommy Trinder in a theatre at the end of a quarter-mile structure over the English Channel, reachable only by walking above the sea, available only in summer, and surrounded by an audience that was here for the same reason he was. The Pier Theatre audience was not a West End theatre audience. It was a democratic mix of visitors who had all walked the same pier to reach the same seats. The Londoner on a day trip, the week-staying family from the Midlands, the couple from Brighton itself. They were all in the same building, had all made the same journey above the water, and were all here to watch the same show. The schoolteacher had booked the third row because he wanted to be close enough to the stage to see the expressions of the performers. He had come on a Thursday because Thursday was the midpoint of the week. Monday had been the beach, Tuesday the promenade, Wednesday the afternoon on the West Pier, and Thursday evening was when the week earned itself its best occasion. The Pier Theatre was not the whole holiday. It was the holiday's hinge, the evening around which the other evenings organized themselves. The Brighton promenade was not the Torquay promenade. In Torquay, people walked to perform a social position. In Brighton, the promenade on a summer morning was organized around the energy of a city that had 52 miles of railway behind it and 57 minutes of electric train in front of anyone who wanted to be here. The promenade walkway along King's Road was shared by the day tripper who had left Victoria at 9 and the week stayer who had arrived on Saturday. In Brighton, the promenade was capacious enough to contain both. The Pebble Beach, Brighton's most conspicuous difference from Eastbourne or Bournemouth or Torquay, enforced a specific democracy of discomfort. No one lay comfortably on Brighton's pebbles without preparation. The deck chair, hired by the hour, was a necessity, and the beach attendant, who had been hiring deck chairs on the same stretch of pebbles for 20 summers, knew the week stayer from the day tripper within 30 seconds of taking their money. What the Brighton promenade gave the schoolteacher on a Tuesday morning was different from what Torquay gave the Birmingham solicitor's wife. Not the performance of aspiration, but the specific freedom of being in a city that did not require the performance. That was already performing at such volume and at such democratic scale that your individual contribution was absorbed without the need for calibration. Brighton's two piers were not the same social institution. The West Pier had been built in 1866, designed by Eugenius Birch. At 1,115 feet, it was shorter than the Palace Pier. Its design was more architecturally refined. After the war, the West Pier became a funfair pier. Concerts gave way to a games arcade, a helter-skelter, dodgems, and a restaurant. The Palace Pier had retained and expanded its variety theatre program through the 1950s. Schoolteacher from Peckham went to the West Pier on Wednesday afternoon, because the West Pier in the afternoon was the right experience for a Wednesday afternoon. The helter-skelter, the arcade, the specific informality of an older, more architecturally beautiful pier that had settled happily into being a place where you went for an hour without any social performance required. And then he went to the Palace Pier on Thursday evening, because Thursday evening was when the social performance was welcome. Brighton's two piers, serving two different versions of the same visitor on two different days of the same week, were the clearest expression of what Brighton had always been, a resort large enough and various enough to provide different things at different times, without requiring its visitors to choose between them. The West Pier closed to the public in 1975. Its Grade I listing in 1982 came too late. The West Pier closed to the public on 28 September 1975. By the early 1960s, a charter flight to Mallorca cost approximately what a week in Brighton's hotels cost. It delivered guaranteed sun and a warm sea, and a novelty that neither the Palace Pier nor the Brighton Belle nor the Pebble Beach could match. What the package holiday abroad did not calculate was the specific experience of walking above the English Channel in the evening to sit in the third row of a theatre that existed nowhere else on the coast. The pool had no equivalent to offer. It did not need to. It was not competing on those terms. The social world that had sustained both piers, the week-staying visitor who spent a morning on one pier and an evening on the other, who came back for a decade and knew which seat to book on which day, that social world had been diminishing since the mid-1960s. If this channel is going to keep documenting what the British seaside meant to the people who made it there 1 week, subscribe. There are more resorts, more hotels, more promenade mornings, and more Thursday evenings at the pier concert that were the best evening of someone's year, and were never described as such because they didn't need to be. What a Thursday evening on the Palace Pier gave a family from London or the Midlands was not entertainment in the ordinary sense. It was the specific pleasure of being on a stage suspended over the sea among 1,000 others who had also come 50 miles to be there, and the knowledge that this was exactly what they had come for. The package hotel in Spain did not offer this. It offered something else. For most families, by the mid-1970s, the something else was enough. And if you have a memory of a pier, of a Brighton boarding house, of the Southern Railway from Victoria, of a Thursday evening when the lights were on the water and the theatre was at the end of the quarter-mile walk, put it in the comments. Did you come to Brighton by train from London, or did your family spend a whole week here? What did the lights above the water look like from the pier head? Next time, Bournemouth's Pavilion Ballroom and the Winter Gardens, and what an evening on the sprung floor gave a couple from the Midlands that Brighton's pier could never have offered. The West Pier closed to the public on 28 September 1975. By 1982, when it received the Grade I listing that made it the only pier in Britain at that designation, the schoolteacher from Peckham who had walked its deck on Wednesday afternoons in the 1950s had long since stopped coming to Brighton for his week. What Spain gave the schoolteacher's family? Guaranteed sun, a pool, a warm sea. What it did not give them, the third row from the front in a theatre at the end of a quarter-mile walk above the English Channel on a Thursday evening in August, when the lights were on the water and the show had not yet started. The Palace Pier had known what to do with a Thursday evening. Mallorca had not been built to ask what Thursday evening was for.